One of the questions I get asked almost daily is how to grow and monetize your podcast. So, as this week's guest, Laura Cathcart Robbins, says in her podcast, The Only One in the Room, this episode is for everyone, which is to say, this episode is for anyone who wants to create a podcast, that is. Listen in for how she created goals when just starting out and how her goals and measures of success have evolved and changed. And of course, listen for her checklist for growth and monetization. Here we go. So now to deep dive into your growth process, because as mentioned in yesterday's episode, I think you're doing an amazing job and you put a lot of things into play first to organically grow. Can you just talk us through what that was like? How'd you do that?
Oh my God, it was so hard.
It's a lot.
So hard. It's a lot. So the first thing is Scott would remind me is that you want, just like I talked about yesterday in building an author's platform, you really kind of want to build a podcast platform where you have the podcast itself, your quality product that you love and believe in, and that if anybody heard, they would want to listen to all the episodes you ever put out because it's so enchanting and enthralling and compelling. So you have that product that you've built and developed and you're really happy with that. The other thing that we did at the same time was creating a website. So the website was out when we launched the podcast. It was live. We did merchandise. We did our Facebook group. We did our newsletter. We did our Facebook page. We have Instagram and Twitter. We're starting something called Stereo, which will be kind of a live component a few times a month to go with the podcast. So that's now though, but that back then we just put everything in place that was suggested to us to have to support this quality product that we loved. And once that was done, part of what was suggested to us and what I really tried to do was to kind of pepper our seasons with guests that had name recognition or followers. And that way we could have them promote and bring in more listeners to their episodes and therefore to the podcast itself. And that definitely works. What I found, which is something, Darcy, that you told me about, was that I don't even remember how you put it. You can probably put it better than me, but it would be a high peak and then there'd be a drop when those listeners kind of disappeared because that guest wasn't
bouncing.
There. Yeah, bouncing. Yeah. That bounce hurts because you get really excited. Oh, we have 3,000 downloads today.
But some stick.
Right. Some do stick.
Yeah.
A little stick every time. Mm-hmm. So, you do build more. You build more. And like we definitely built over the years, but the growth was very slow at times.
Right.
And a lot of it was guest dependent. So, my whole thing with this quality podcast that I love was I didn't want to sacrifice content for guest appeal.
Agreed.
And that was hard. Those are hard choices to make because here's a great story, but we're staying the same or we're losing listeners. So I know I could put this person on and get the listenership back up.
But it's temporary, right? So
it's
then
temporary.
You get the bounce.
Yeah.
So it doesn't really yield the results that you're hoping for in terms of the longevity needed for podcasting versus going viral on social media or on YouTube.
Yes.
So that's a really good distinction to make because it is different.
It is, and I also feel like I was compromising my integrity a little by going after guests for name recognition or followers only. It didn't feel right to me.
It has to be both.
Yeah. And our podcast is very intimate in nature. It's not a business profile. It's not, just one of those banter back and forth podcasts. It's a personal essay. We're bringing in somebody to tell a very vulnerable personal story. So I really wanted to take that care with it. Yeah. So that was, that's what we did. We tried to create that balance so that we had guests that would bring in listeners. We have great stories once they get there. And, it's exhausting. It took a lot of work.
Yeah. I was going to ask you, how did you motivate the guests to share? Because a lot of people struggle with that. I think you do a really savvy job with it because, again, like you said, you're very nice. You mentioned that in yesterday's episode, and there's a charm that comes with that ask. But can you just quickly tell us like the ones that...
I mean, this is what I say. When we finish the podcast, I'll say we can edit out anything that you're not happy with or anything that's uncomfortable if you want. I'm not going to let them listen to it, to be clear. But if they have reflected back on the interview and think, I really wish I hadn't said this or said this person's name, I let them know that I'm going to take it out because I want them to promote it. So I need them to be comfortable with it. That's the first part of my ask to promoting it.
Got it.
It's like, I need you to promote this. So
they need to feel safe.
Yeah. And then I text them when we're close to dropping the episode. And I say, hey, just listen to the last edit of your episode. It's amazing. Mm-hmm. I'm going to send you a postable so that you can just copy and paste so it's no trouble to promote the episode when it comes out. But I just wanted to give you the heads up, and I love it so much, and I'll say something personal about their episode in that. And then when the episode drops, I'll send them that postable. Mm-hmm. I don't know if that's a word, but that's what I call it.
I like it. And that just means to define it for anyone who's not sure, is just something that they can copy paste into their social medias, and they don't have to think about what to say and what am I
exactly. It's a little script and a link and a picture.
Right.
So I send them all three of those things, and then I'll say things like say, Barcy, it's your episode and it's, coming up on 8:00 the day of your drop and 8 p.m. and you haven't posted anything. I'll circle back and say, I just want to make sure you love the episode as much as I did. When you post, please tag me so I can make sure to share with my listeners. And then I'll usually get a response back. I haven't got time yet, or I'm scheduling out my posts for the week. You'll be on Friday. If it's someone who has a lot of followers, they'll let me in on that. And then that's the last time I'll contact them for a couple days because I don't want to bug them. So they're like, I'm not posting her at all. But those three things usually get a response. And cool. I've been very pleased with how our guests are promoting the show. They've all been really nice about it. And, I can only think of a couple people that didn't promote at all.
Wow. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that little strategy, because I think a lot of people, if they're not used to reaching out that way, it can feel like a burden or an awkward thing, or like it's too much or whatever. Yeah. But I like that way of kind of just, sound like about 3 touch points outside of the initial, like, we're going to ask you to share moment. Yeah. So thank you for breaking that down. So we've switched gears recently, and when I say we, I just mean the only one in the room, from all of the I take that back. You're still doing all of the organic stuff. You're still doing all of that heavy lifting too. But you've kind of found new ways to market the podcast so that it grows a little quicker. And there are more things that are available now that were not available even just a few months ago. So I have to point that out too, because podcasting is changing constantly in what we can and can't do and how things happen. So that's something to say. But I'm just curious how you and Scott knew that there needs to be a new strategy in play.
Well, this goes back to something I was saying yesterday about attending conferences, festivals, etc. I was at PodFest, this was the largest virtual podcasting conference in the world. And that was in August of 2020, or maybe September. Anyway, it was in the fall, late summer, fall 2020. And this woman named Katie Kremitzos, who is a podcaster, she has a podcast that started during the pandemic and is now doing, I think, 1 million downloads a month.
Wow. That's big.
Incredible growth. And so she was on to talk about her growth. And one of the things she said, everything she said got my attention, but one of the things she said just left my face on the floor, or my jaw on the floor, which was, I was so tired of the heavy lifting of trying to grow my podcast organically. And she said, if I thought about how much time and effort I was putting in, and converted that into dollars, I was putting all my resources into getting this podcast noticed by the right people, getting more listeners, and doing this kind of promotion and doing this on Instagram and getting this guest and getting so-and-so to talk about it. And so she said she decided to put her money into advertising instead. And when she did that, she saw immediate growth that would have taken her years to get. And so she has chosen to do back-to-back advertising campaigns on different platforms. And I don't know exactly how much she's bought or exactly where all they're advertising, but she did talk about a few specific ones where she had a lot of success. So I took notes. And she's actually somebody I know. So I hit her up right after that, and she was so kind. Again, podcasters are super generous. She spent a little while with me. She spent a little while with Scott and broke down for us what she did. And even though we weren't ready to enter into the advertising game at the level that she was because of where she was with her podcast, we entered at an entry level and started advertising. And I think what happened was this was in October of 2020, and we went from, 600 to 800 downloads per episode to where we're averaging 7,000 to 8,000. And we release 4 episodes a week. So right. That's the other thing is we release a lot more than some podcasters do. So, but that's all sellable, Mm-hmm. So that's an opportunity for an advertiser to get in front of your listener 4 times during a week, which is great. So we are continuing campaigns, and the goal is obviously not just to make money, but to make enough money, not only that we can pay for all the production of the podcast, but to profit.
Sure.
Like we'd like to be able to maybe support ourselves on this podcast, which seemed so far away even 6 months ago.
Wow. Thank you. Yeah. And it's true. There was not this solution before. So things will continue to grow and change, and there'll probably be more opportunities like that for people. And so I want to talk about how we measure success and goals, and it sounds like that has changed over the period that you've been in existence. So can you just help us understand how you measured success along the journey and how that's changed now?
Yeah, I think at first, because the podcast was created simply to support my writing, it was what I understand now is called a hobby podcast. We were not, or the goal was not to make it a business, not to make it, that's not true. We would have been really happy if we could have monetized it early on, but that wasn't the goal. So that is true. It wasn't the goal to monetize it, but we wanted to make it something that would be really beneficial to my author's platform, meaning more listeners going to my writing and supporting my writing, and that being something that, kind of traded back and forth. People who like my writing go to listen to podcasts, blah, blah, blah. So that was like the first year, that was really our goal. And then the second year 2, our goal has been to monetize it. So we had to look at the success of the podcast a lot differently. And it wasn't just like the first year, the success was measured in how many, people reached back out to us and told us that the podcast really changed their lives or did or said something to them that had never been done before. Or we got a guest who had never told their story before. And they were, really grateful that they had a place where they could share their story for the first time. Mm-hmm. And we can still factor that into our success. But as far as what we're our goals now are different because we have that. Mm-hmm. And we know we can be a place for that. And now we're looking to monetize, which means that we have to be a lot more involved in marketing and advertising.
Right.
Again, which is Scott Slaughter's department for the most part. But he can't do it alone. We're partners.
Right. That's great. Thank you. Yeah. And it does change. And I will say, I never saw the the only one in the room, it's a hobby podcast. I actually don't think it falls into that category because you are connecting it to a platform that was designed to make you money. So from my perspective, I don't see that as a hobby podcast. I think hobby podcasts are things that you do because you have free time. It's not connected to anything else other than things you just like, and maybe your friends listen.
Right.
Where
right.
I do think
agree.
there's a difference there. And I just want to point that out. So for anyone who's starting out and wants to understand how to create some kind of growth starting out, do you have any advice for them that could be either, you know, how to set goals or what they should be focused on, and or what their first step could be in growing?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that it was suggested to me to do, which is really something I didn't do a lot of at first. And you asked me yesterday if I could go back and tell myself something. This would be another thing that I would say is pitch myself to other podcasts and get on these other podcasts. That's a really good way to grow your own. And
yes.
And somebody at one of these conferences said it really well. It's like, you know, if I go to someone's podcast and they only have an audience of 10, that's still 10 people that probably weren't listening to mine. Mm-hmm. And it's so exponential, right? 10 people, if 5 of them tell their friends or share it, if 5 of them listen to that plea at the end, please share the podcast with your friends, like, you know, subscribe, leave us a review, all those things that we ask kind of in a rote way, but they're really important for growth.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's something people can do at any stage, right? It's all about sharing what you have to say, and why not do it on other platforms instead of just your own? So why not? I mean, that's always a good way to keep it going and growing. Thank you. I like that. I love that piece of advice. So thank you for doing this deep dive. I appreciate that extra sort of tidbit breakdown of how things have worked, how they're working now. I think it's really valuable. So just thank you for sticking around and giving this extra bit.
Well, thank you for letting me be one of your first guests in this new format. I think it's great. I'm so excited about it. I can't wait to listen to it, and not just because it's me, but because I think it's a really good, I think it's, you know, for anyone who wants to learn more than they know, because you make it so personal, and then you have the business side factored in, and the human part of that is really important, and you do that so well, Barcy.
Oh,
so thank you.
Thank you. That means the world to me coming from you. So I appreciate that very, very much. And you're the first one that I got to do this format with. I don't know if you'll be the first one released yet. We'll find out. But either way, it's exciting, and you'll hear some familiar voices in this format that you know as well. So that should be fun. Well, thank you. Thank you so much. And I guess we probably both have to get back to work.
Yeah, I know. It was so much fun, though. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to Be Bold Begin. Don't forget to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts so as not to miss an episode. So the best way to ensure you get all the new episodes is by subscribing. Help us build a positive community by joining the Facebook group, also called Be Bold Begin. I'll be checking it daily to answer and acknowledge any of your questions and comments. Stay positive and safe out there.